My name is Thomas Mauriello. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice here in the state of Maryland. I'm a retired special agent with the United States government, and I've been teaching for 43 years here on campus while I was an agent. And I have a company called Forensic IQ, where I provide my forensic consultant services to defense attorneys. So.
That's great. And can you tell us a little bit, can you explain what we're seeing as far as the CSI Nexus Pyramid?
Absolutely. It was my understanding that you were studying the crime scene and the process, which is a very important aspect of an investigation. And as you can see, when you have a crime, you have a victim, and you have a suspect, and connecting those three, you have a crime scene. A crime scene is any location where you have evidence that relates to the crime. It could be eyewitness evidence. It could be a confession from a suspect, but most importantly, physical evidence. Physical evidence that relates the victim, the suspect, and the crime together. So, sometimes you simply need to ensure that you have evidence to prove that the victim was at the location. For example, if you have a victim who says, I was robbed at such and such a address out in the street, and you're trying to corroborate that person's statement, finding any physical evidence, trace evidence, DNA, fingerprints at that location is part of the overall crime scene process. Can I continue at this point?
Yes, absolutely, sir.
Okay,
absolutely.
Very good. And if you have any questions, I can talk and talk, and I only have like 20 minutes to do that.
Yeah, so we'll do student questions at the end, so you just kind of do your thing.
Okay, very good. All right, so I'm going to jump down through the basic steps that a police officer, the first person at a crime scene usually is a uniformed officer, and his or her job is to stop time, to establish that a crime has been committed, and determine where the location is, and to physically secure that, protect it, and determine, where the crime scene begins and where it ends. And that's important because many times the police don't do that. I've actually worked cases where the police forgot to ever establish the crime scene. They never said, ladies and gentlemen, this is a crime scene and it needs to be protected. If you don't secure it properly, people are walking in it, out of it, and later on when you go to trial, if the defense finds out that it wasn't properly identified, they can sometimes have a lot of important evidence thrown out because of it. I understand that you've been talking a little bit about surveying the crime scene. That's where, you're looking for evidence. Sometimes you know specifically what you're looking for, but sometimes you don't know. What is evidence? Evidence is anything that may relate to the crime, or when you're not sure what it is, if it doesn't fit, if it doesn't belong where you see it, then you take it. I always tell my students and my police officers that I'm training, if you're not sure whether it's evidence or not, if you're not sure if it's important or not, collect it. It's free. Take it. You can give it back to whoever later on. So searching the crime scene and locating physical evidence are important. Recording the crime scene, obviously very important. When we say recording it, taking notes, making sure that who came to the crime scene, when do they come? Photographing, very important. Now, there's a difference between photographing and sketching. Photographing the crime scene captures what you can see. And one of the first questions that an investigator will get asked when they're testifying in a crime is, what did the crime scene look like when you got there? So it's very important to capture that. Now, sketches, and I'm going to give you, this is an example of a typical sketch that could be done at a crime scene. As you can see, the sketch can capture the whole real estate, the whole area. A photograph can't do this. Photograph will give you pictures from certain locations, but here you can see the measurements. You can see where, here we have illustrations of two bodies, and you can see where they are in relationship to the entrance door. You can see where there's windows, etc. So a sketch is always done separate and distinct from the photographing, but they're both important to processing the crime scene. Chain of custody is really important. Documenting evidence. When you present physical evidence at in a courtroom, you have to prove to the trier of fact. Now, in most cases in America, anyways, the trier of fact are the jury, the 12 people who will be making decisions. You have to show that the evidence that you're presenting today in the courtroom is the same evidence that was at the crime scene. So the chain of custody, an important term, I don't know if you're in your class where you're talking about it, is the documentation to say, okay, this is evidence was found at the crime scene. How do I know it's that evidence? Because I properly marked it and inscribed my initials on it or whatever. It was placed in an evidence bag and I signed it and put the date and time. I handed it over to the evidence property person. When I gave it to them, you can see their name. They signed it and put their date and time. Eventually, it went from the property room to the crime lab, and the person who transported it to the crime lab, they signed it and put the date and time. So the chain of custody is a big, long list of people who took property of that evidence. Ultimately, the last person on it should be the person who actually transported it to the courtroom. So if the chain of custody is broken, if there's a period of time where we don't know where that evidence was or who had it, possession of it, that evidence could be thrown out and not used in the trial. So that's why it's so important. Collecting and preserving crime scene evidence. There's a lot of case law in reference to when you go. Bottom line is, when a crime is reported and is established, there needs to be a search warrant that is created. A search warrant is a document, a legal document that says, why you have access to the scene and what you're looking for. If you ever have to go back to the crime scene another time, you have to get another search warrant, or you have to get permission from the owner of that location. Marking, tagging, documenting physical evidence, very important. When you place a piece of evidence in an evidence bag, the kind of evidence bag that you put it in, there's all kinds of different containers that you could put it in. You might say, well, so what? You can put it in a plastic bag, you can put it in a can. The bottom line is certain evidence needs to be preserved in certain things. The reason why I'm so sensitive to this is when I was a young investigator and didn't have the training and knowledge that I have today, I actually put evidence in the wrong kinds of containers, and ultimately when it went to the crime lab and was taken out of the container, the evidence was contaminated and destroyed. For example, biological fluid, any type of biological fluid that's found at a crime scene, blood, earwax, urine, any kind of biological fluid must be air dried before it's placed in a container. And the only kind of container that it can be placed in is a container that will breathe, like paper bags. If you put it in a plastic bag and it's still wet and hasn't completely dried, then mold will grow and destroy the value of that evidence. So it's very important to, so when you're collecting evidence at a crime scene that has biological fluids and it's still wet, what we do is we put them in in paper bags that are still open. We don't seal them or anything. We bring them back to the police department, and we place them in special secure rooms, and literally put them out on sometimes on clotheslines to let them air dry. When they're completely dry, then we put them in again a paper bag, seal them, and make them part of the chain of custody. See these paint cans? Paint cans are great in an arson case. I had an arson case where somebody had set fire to a dormitory room. And it ended up to be the person who lived there who set fire to his own dormitory room for a number of reasons, which we won't go into. But when I got to the scene, he was covered with a blanket and it reeked of lighter fluid. He said, I was in bed and the person who came in and set fire to my room squirted me with lighter fluid. And I smelt it. I said, I could even smell it because I knew what lighter fluid smelled like. So I very carefully placed it in a nice plastic bag like this, and I closed it so it would be airtight, and I sent it to the crime lab. A few weeks later, I called up the crime lab and I said, hey, what type of combustible fluid was on that blanket? Because we found an empty can of lighter fluid out in the bushes that was thrown out of the window from the crime scene. And his response was, we didn't find any combustible fluid on the blanket. There was nothing there. I said, well, what do you mean? I could smell it. He said, well, it's probably because you put it in a plastic bag. I said, what was the problem with that? Well, plastic has a petroleum base, so it interferes with whatever might have been on that blanket. Plus, if you put a plastic bag over your head, you could suffocate, but no matter how tight you make that plastic bag, it will still lose the fumes that come off from the combustible fluid. By the time they got it in the crime lab and the time they opened it up, all of that was lost. I said, okay, well, teach me to do it right. He said, simple. You have to buy a bunch of different size paint cans. Like here's a quart size, here's a gallon size, there's 5 gallon sizes. You place it in the paint can, not obviously one that has never been used and had paint in it, and you seal it tight. Nothing will be lost. And in the crime lab, what they do, they have a special tool where they'll put a hole in the can, and at the same time, it'll suck in all the air into a special scientific instrument that will detect what it is. So sometimes you learn from your mistakes, and I certainly did that in this case. I want to get out of my thing because I like to be able to have you see me and me see you. Now, I would rather answer your questions. I know you have to have questions. You've been talking about it. Anything that you didn't understand or whatever, ask away or type it. Ralph, do you have any questions yet?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've gotten some emailed to me. And those of you who have any more questions, the chat is opened up. Feel free to message them in the chat. Some of the students, they want to know, and I know you answered this for a previous group, but what kind of subjects would you recommend that they study in high school if they are interested in pursuing a career in crime scene investigations?
Okay. Well, when we talk about crime scene investigation, we talk about the police investigators. And then we talk about the CSI, the crime scene investigators. And a lot of you watch TV shows, CSI and all those. I want you to know that today, the way it is most crime scene investigators are not trained police officers. They're not police officers. They are civilians who work for the police department. And the people who are being hired as CSI investigators now are people with chemistry degrees, biology degrees. So if you are truly interested in crime scene and working on crime scene and collection and preservation and recording of the crime scenes, you need to have a science background. Certainly you need a science background if you want to be the one that actually examines the evidence. TV makes you think that the people who collect the evidence at the crime scene are the same ones that examine it in the crime lab. That is not true. Crime scene investigators are civilians. Their job is to go to the crime scene, record the crime scene, look for evidence, collect evidence, package it, transport it to the crime lab, end of story. They stop there. I think that answers the question.
No, that more than answers that question. We appreciate that. So we have a question from our friend Pablo. He is in Spain. He had a pretty awesome question. You should be able to unmute to ask Professor Mauriello.
Yeah, hello, Tom. My question was, is there any difference between criminology and criminalistics? Thank you.
Oh, yes. You got criminal justice, criminology, criminalistics, okay? And then you have forensic science. All right. Criminology is the study of the causation of crime. It's a combination of sociology and psychology. Criminologists are people who study, why people commit crime and how to prevent it from happening in the future, okay? Criminal justice is the study of the legal and the investigative aspects, how to investigate it. Most potential police officers have degrees in criminal justice. Forensic science and criminalistics are really synonymous. Anybody who tries to make a distinction between the two is kidding themselves, okay? So criminalistics, forensic science, the word forensic simply means applied to law. So any science that is being used to examine evidence that would be used in a criminal investigation and presented in court becomes a forensic science. So if you major in chemistry and you get hired by a crime lab and you start testifying to what you examined, you become a forensic chemist. There are foot doctors, a podiatrist, there are forensic foot doctors. Believe it or not, that there's a portion of foot doctors that can help us forensically. They see a suspect running away in a video. The way they walk, a forensic foot doctor can tell us a lot about that person. So I think that answers your question without going any further.
Absolutely. We have a question from one of the students in Spain, and they wanted to know about the importance of documentation and any advances in technology, which also kind of touches on forensic IQ. Would you be able to tell the kids a little bit about your work with combining the documentation importance with crime scene investigation
Yes.
with technology, with your work with that?
Absolutely. First of all, documentation is vital because the people who are going to decide this case never was at the crime scene. The documentation of it is vital because if you did something or didn't do something and it's not represented in the report. For example, when I get hired by a defense attorney, one of the first things I do is I read all the documentation. That way I can find out what they did or didn't do, or what they missed or whatever. And the problem with a lot of the crime scene processing is that police officers generally know what needs to be done, but sometimes they forget things. And sometimes if they've never done, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've never investigated a robbery because of where you're stationed or whatever, all of a sudden, all the things you need to know about robbery have to be in your mind. And sometimes it's not there. It could be on your notes from a course you took or a textbook that you have at home, but it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're at the scene. So, I was looking at technology and I've been teaching students and police officers for years. And I find that, they're not documenting everything and they're not making the certain observations that they should. So I thought about creating an app. And I just launched the app. It's called CSI Checklist. If you go to either Apple or Android, the store or Google Play, you'll find the CSI Checklist. And it's a series of checklists, on different types of crimes and different responsibilities. And as you go down it, you can just check it off, and whatever you check off will create a document. So the technology that everybody has on their person, I don't care who you are, what country you're from, is a telephone. And now for the first time, the criminal justice community has the technology, if you want, well, everybody has the technology of the phone, but the software, an app is something that I believe is vital, and it'll provide some consistency. So if I'm a supervisor and I have a bunch of investigators out there doing their thing, how do I know they're doing it all the same way and doing it right? Well, if I provide the app to them and I require them to use it and identify what they've done, then it'll provide more quality control and more consistency.
Yeah, and it seems like it'll be more of a fair trial, to where the chain of custody, as far as evidence, what you were talking about, if there's one uniform way of doing that.
You know, I get paid to see what mistakes police and CSI people do, and I want to get out of the business. I don't want to see any mistakes.
There you go. And we're going to provide the link for forensiciqinc.com that's going to be embedded in the video here at this point, and we'll provide it for everyone who's on the call right now. We have another student question before we let you go. This is from Annalisa, and she is in Italy. Annalisa, you had a pretty good question. Go ahead and ask.
Hi, and thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you, what's the big difference between a criminologist and a forensic psychologist?
A criminologist, okay, okay. Well, again, criminology is the study of sociology and psychology, okay? A forensic psychologist is one specifically that deals with the psychology in therapy. It's more therapeutic. Their focus is on therapy. Most correctional institutions will hire forensic psychologists in their attempt to try to reform them, to identify what causes them to commit this crime, and can that behavior be changed. The criminologist is different in that their focus is simply doing research on various aspects of the criminal act themselves. So the forensic psychologist focuses on the person who commits the crime. The criminologist focuses on the crime itself.
That is a solid answer. And first of all, thank you for taking the time to speaking to so many students around the world. I know we're on all different schedules here, but before we let you go, can you speak on where you think technology is going as far as its influence on the process of collecting evidence?
Technology's helped us capture the crime scene. You know, there's new type photography, 360 type photography, etc. DNA has totally changed the whole investigative process. And the technology that today is certainly much better than 1985 when Dr. Jeffries in England created this process. I think technology eventually is going to allow us to literally do a DNA test at the scene immediately and allow us to go into databases and identify people. If you watch certain TV shows, they're doing that now. If you want to know what technology is going to be doing for us in the future, watch TV shows today, because a lot of what they're creating that makes you think we have that technology isn't there. But some of the technology we have today actually was being shown 20 years ago on television, and we were all laughing about it, and now it's here. So that's the best way I would answer that question. You know, we need to have information as fast as possible. You know, right now, you know, you have a fingerprint. If that person who left that fingerprint has ever been arrested, ideally they should be in the APHIS database. we should be able to have technology right at the crime scene that we can find that out right now. That doesn't exist right now. It does on television shows, but those kinds of things are going to be certainly going to be helpful. The faster we can get to identifying the suspect, the faster we can get to solving the case. The longer the time goes, the more difficult it is.